Duke of Karzi. The wealth and power of the Urbios family surpasses several times the imperial family of the Sart state. It is no exaggeration to say that the blessing of the goddess of Sart first reached the Urbios family. Among them is the man with the greatest glory, Karse Urbios. A young duke with perfect looks, wealth, and title. There was another reason he was popular. Aslan bad rumors about her dead wife. Smart people say that the duke can be compared to a jewel wrapped in a veil. A young charioteer drives a horse-drawn carriage. It's a warm summer's day. The guy with white hair says that only 2 months ago, Duke Karzi returned to the empire after studying abroad and has never appeared in public. And the more people become willing to marry him, the more strange rumors spread. The stable boy turns his gaze back to the carriage. The boy heard how the first girl to marry Duke Karzi suddenly dies within a year due to a curse. The charioteer hopes it's just a common rumor that says nothing about the real deal of things. The stable boy apologizes to the lady, and he didn't mean to scare her because the lady is going to the Duchy of Urbios. The jolly lad turns to the lady sitting in the carriage behind him and smiles. He asks, what lady in her right mind would marry that duke? But the guy's laughter was short-lived because the girl didn't appreciate his joke. The lady he's bringing is really going to marry the Duke of Karza. The white-haired groom apologizes to the lady for his behavior. He was very embarrassed that he made the lady so nervous with his stories and chatter. After a while they arrive, and lady gets out of the carriage. She looks around with a face that expresses great doubt. In this place, the girl will make a contract marriage. A butler comes up to the Duke of Karza. They discuss something for a while, and the man decides what is the right thing to do in this contract that they are signing. So the Duke, after some thought, hands the butler the documents. Then the butler goes to the lady to ask the girl to read carefully all the documents. It is a contract marriage. The butler points out the main points of the contract. The man realizes that it's a pity for such a young and beautiful lady. This girl is doomed to be in a loveless marriage. At some point, when the girl is very much worried and her assistant gives the lady a handkerchief. The girl thanks the assistant, and the butler at this moment observes the strange situation. He thinks that the lady has a kind character. The butler tells the lady that as she already knows, the wedding of the lady and the duke will take place soon, so she would like to check again the pre-agreed agreement. The Duke says that he personally received this document from the Archbishop, if the lady agrees and signs it. From that moment on, the contract will be protected by the power of the Garden Goddess. The lady thinks about these words. She realizes that this is a serious contract, and she has to make a decision once and for all. The maid, who is standing near the lady, is worried because her mistress is now choosing her path for the next decade. But the mistress tries to calm her assistant so that she doesn't worry because everything is under control. The butler says that if the lady signs the contract, she will be the Duchess of Urbios for 1 year, from the day of the founding of the state. In return, the lady will be paid an advance of 100,000 gold pieces. In addition, 10,000 will be paid monthly for personal expenses. If the lady successfully fulfills the contract, she will receive 1 million gold. At this point, when the butler was giving all this information, the lady became a little withdrawn. The butler tries to explain to the lady to listen to him. There's no reason for the lady to worry about anything, and there's only one main thing the lady wants. But the lady interrupts the butler and says she knows the arrangement. The lady must be quiet as a mouse, also loyal and honest. The butler confirms the lady's words and says she's got it right. He says then there is one last point, and that is the expiration date of this contract. The Duke asks how long he has to wait. The butler tries to calm the young gentleman down so he doesn't get angry. At one point, the Duke can't stand it. He walks across the corridor to the ladies' table, and placing the contract beside the girl, the Duke leans over and asks her if there are any more questions about the engagement. The mistress looks into the Duke's bright and clear eyes and notices the scar on the man's eyebrow. The Duke himself looks very belligerent, and most importantly, he is incredibly attractive. The Duke does not hear the answer from the lady and considers that silence is a sign of agreement, so he points his finger where to sign and asks to do it quickly. The girl signs the contract, and a divine power appears that paints everything around her in bright colors. Now the contract will be protected by the word of the goddess. Electrical impulses hit the sheet, and it rises into the sky. The Duke sees what is happening and says he has to go. He turns around and leaves abruptly, also leaving behind the lady who is alone. The butler tries to get along and says that the Duke doesn't usually behave like this. Probably he is busy with some very important business. Lady perfectly understands the butler, and then the butler tells her that really the Duke is a man of few words and he does not know how to express his emotions. Now that Lady has arrived in the duchy, the Duke gradually changes. The man says out of disgust that it is actually an absurd rumor that the mistress of the Duchy of Urbios died because of a curse. The first girl married to the Duke suddenly dies within 1 year because of the curse. The coachman who drove the lady to the Duke on the road also spoke of a similar rumor. The butler says that they are trying to find the spreader of such absurd slander by all means and punish him severely. So the butler asks the lady not to pay attention to such rumors and wishes the lady good night. The lady replies to the butler that she is really fine, so there is no need to worry about her because it was really her who spread these rumors. Events take us to a little backstory. Wise and kind girl Sazel with a great appearance and soft character. Simply put, this is the girl who has everything. But if that was the end of it all, the story wouldn't begin. The story begins in the northern borderlands, in the town of Perron. Hazel's father is Viscount Edward Aramis. He has lived a righteous life as a man of straightforward and honest character. But there was one problem. But the father had a problem. He had an excessive sense of duty that prevented him from just living his life to his satisfaction, and so the man tried to become a role model. His daughter should become a lady that everyone would want to emulate. Could she do the same as the vulgar girls who say money is everything in this world? Father always asked. Is Hazel's hair color so bright and screaming? The father didn't like his daughter's appearance, which was very flamboyant. Hazel did not want to disappoint her father, who is his only family. The girl, for her father's sake, dyed her hair so that her father would love her more. If her father only loved her truly, she would be truly happy. Hazel's family was the most powerful in all Perron. The fact that many followed the Duke was an example to Hazel's pride. But pride that should have been eternal didn't last long. Perron's hometown was eventually caught up in a storm of development. If you sold expensive land for the money offered, you could live on it without working for the rest of your life. The new business was a pivotal, life-changing event in their family. The Duke was told to protect Perron's honor. You can't sell pride to people who know nothing but money. People told the Duke not to do such things. And this land does not only belong to the Viscount, for it is also the pride and the breath of Perron. What the father did was naturally the right thing to do. At some point, an anxious man comes in and opens the door and says that the lady must go with him immediately, for there is trouble with the Viscount. The girl recognizes him as the butler. The girl comes to her father, who asks him to bring him more medicine. Apparently, her father is seriously ill. For some time, the father could not even get out of bed. The father's last instructions were that Sazel should always live right. She should be honest, so that she would not be ashamed to be the heiress to a Viscount. Her father remained honest for the rest of his life. But after his death, Hazel couldn't even shed a tear because it was such a vain death. The girl was distraught over her father's death, and on the day of his funeral, she was approached by a man who told Hazel not to be afraid, because he would always be there for her. After all, they are one family. Hazel realizes that her father always told her to trust those around her, relying on and helping each other. Hazel decided to trust her father's instructions, taking care of her body and spirit. Hazel realized that family was a very important part of life, but things turned out to be much worse than the girl had imagined. The former mistress had been kicked out of the house. Hazel knelt in front of her relatives and was shown the eviction order. But Hazel couldn't understand what was happening because her father hadn't sold the mansion. The man who offered her help says he doesn't know about her father, but his deputy has other ideas about selling the mansion. Sazel doesn't understand. She's terrified of which deputy she's talking about now. It was a real betrayal of her uncle, a forged document, a backstabbing, and a collapse. It's not that Hazel couldn't say those words because she was stupid. It's just that she'd never been suspicious of anyone before. It was like a theater and everyone was playing their part. Eventually, Hazel was kicked out and left empty-handed. She couldn't even lift a finger to watch the mansion that had stood for hundreds of years collapse. It was the mansion she had been born in, and now it was falling apart. The girl was truly stunned by what had happened, and she realized the senselessness of it all. Values such as honesty, loyalty, and trust, which the girl had never betrayed, suddenly turned away from her. But the heartless world didn't end there. It was only the beginning. The people who were once kind to Hazel were unable to help the girl. They apologized to Hazel and said that they would be happy to help, but they have a difficult situation. To top it all off, they accused Hazel of being ignorant for coming in like this. And others said Hazel should get used to the bad times sooner rather than later, because no one could help her. Basically, Hazel was rejected, and no one wanted to help her. No one even served Hazel a hot meal. And no one stood up for her when she tried to prove that her uncle had forged the documents. After all this happened, the series of frauds and betrayals continued. Hazel just tried to live by her father's teachings. Hazel lived a good and honorable life, but that life was not long. Hazel was sentenced to death because she forgot her duty as a nobleman and took another man's life. So the girl had to atone for her sins by dying. The source of the problem was a guild owner who had been harassing Hazel because she hadn't been able to pay back the money she'd borrowed for years. The moment the guild owner grabbed her, the best thing to do was to throw an object at him, which turned out to be the marble seal. The girl killed the guild owner who was coming at her with the marble seal. Hazel isn't even surprised. How can a human life be so miserable? Before she died, the girl even smiled and fearlessly looked into the eyes of death. An executioner came up to her and started pulling the girl's hair. The man asked, "Did Hazel decide to laugh before she died?" The judge said that Hazel was a suicide bomber and she was repulsive, with no sign of remorse of a heartless killer who took the life of another human being. The girl continued to be held by her hair. People around her screamed for Hazel to be killed because to them she looked like a real killer. However, Hazel's life was not in vain, because she had comrades who had shared the joys and sorrows of St. Pleasant Prison for 10 years. But Hazel has realized that even friendship has come to an end, and now she sees the dreaded guillotine about to chop off her head at the last moment of her life. Hazel looks up into the sky and asks her father, is he happy with his daughter who decided to follow in his footsteps? She did everything her father asked her to do before he died. The girl did everything to make her father really proud of her. The girl is not ashamed because she lived her life according to her father's will, but if asked if she'd live that way again. Hazel, at the moment, her head was in the guillotine hole. She realized she would live as she wished if she were alive again. Hazel decided she would deceive herself before she was deceived. She decided that she would eat others before she herself was eaten. The girl would look at the faces of her abusers as she beat them herself. If only she could be born again, if only she could open her eyes. But when the girl most wanted to be alive again, then she could still open her eyes and look at the world through her green eyes. The girl finds herself in her bed with her neck intact. The girl can't understand what's happening because this is her old room in the ruined mansion. At some point, the girl hears a familiar voice calling her name. Hazel listens and is incredibly startled. Her uncle looks at Hazel and says that Hazel has passed out. She scared everyone and was unconscious for a while. They put her in a room for Hazel to come to her senses. The uncle asks if Hazel recognizes him. The girl angrily clutches the blanket in her bed and realizes that of course she knows the bastard. How could she not know the man who threw her life into a real cesspool? Her uncle was the person she hated most in her life. But she realizes that everything around her is too realistic to lead before she dies. She must have been time-traveled because there's no other explanation. Her uncle says her brother's funeral is over, so she can't stay like this all this time. Hazel now realizes what time she's in, which means her brother's funeral is over and she's still in time. She realizes that she is now in the time of her father's funeral. Then the girl can still make a difference. Hazel starts to really cry. The girl is incredibly shocked to realize that she's being given a second chance. If she's really back in time, then her assumption is correct. Even the handkerchief is exactly the same. Now, her uncle offers Hazel a handkerchief to wipe away her tears. Hazel doesn't understand why she couldn't see the devil that lurked beneath her uncle's guise. The uncle says she needs a good rest for Hazel, and what she needs most of all right now is to recover. She doesn't want to follow in her father's footsteps. Hazel realizes that the face she sees is full of lies. Hazel starts laughing, and the laughter sounds really hysterical. Her uncle is a little worried. Why would a girl suddenly start laughing like that? When just now Hazel was crying. Cecil asks the uncle and his wife to get out of here quickly, otherwise Cecil will be very angry. The uncle and his wife don't understand what's happened now. After all, she didn't talk to them like this before. Hazel smiles and is all bright and shiny with joy. She says she wants to get some rest. Uncle says it's quite expected. Then they'll go away and let Cecil call them anytime she needs help. But Cecil asks in a slightly devilish voice to her uncle, who turns around at Cecil's truly scary voice. Hazel looks at her uncle so innocuously that it seems genuinely evil. She tells her uncle to take her father's watch off her wrist and only then leave. Hazel thanks fate that she's back and can say that line to her uncle's face. She is finally happy that she was given a chance to deal with those nasty thieves. The girl looks in the mirror and can't imagine that she's finally back and now has a second chance to make things right. Sazel realizes that she is very unaccustomed to smiling. She wasn't kicked out of the mansion or imprisoned for murder. It was a hellish life where all she could do was hold back tears. To be honest, after she was born, the only time she smiled was in prison, where she had some really good friends that Hazel found common ground with. But what might have become of her already close friends who were in prison? Hazel doesn't know about their fate and their lives. The guys were like real sisters she'd lived with for 10 years. Although they were quite rough, they were more honest than anyone else. Hazel respected them, and most of all wished she could see them now. Through her friends, Hazel had made the necessary connections needed to live in a dangerous world. Hazel had always been a bit cruel and knew what betrayal was. But she was deceived because the heroine was a good soul. After all, what she definitely learned in prison for 10 years was how to swear. The warden said he needed the space, so he would take away one of the cells. Then, Hazel wondered what would happen to the prisoners in the cell that would be vacated for the warden's purposes. But the warden then said those prisoners had no choice but to die. Either way, they're doomed. Now Hazel is shaken by the fact that the people she cares about are being taken away from her. The girl looks at the portrait of her father, who always wanted her to live a righteous and honorable life. Now she will not follow in her father's footsteps, and they will see who was right. Hazel decides what is rightfully hers to protect, and no one will stop her from doing so. Events are rescheduled. It's evening outside a tavern on the outskirts of the village. There are guys drinking alcoholic beverages coming out of a noisy tavern. A man sits at a table, and his name is Edgar, the head of a mercenary guild, who tells his interlocutor that no one has contacted them so far, which is absurd. Edgar doesn't understand. Is his interlocutor sure that he has made a deal with that cunning man, or rather his younger brother? But the man Edgar is talking to asks him to wait, because he thinks the younger brother will make a decision within today. Edgar pulls up and says that it's very boring to wait here for a week. This situation is really problematic because he knows the customers. The man Edgar's talking to asks if he knows who the Marquis of Kyle is. If he finds out that Edgar is wasting his time like this, he'll burn him alive, Edgar asks. What's he supposed to do then, since Aramis won't move for money? Why would he listen to such a redneck? Edgar looks into his cup and sadly states the fact that he did not think of such consequences, that the case would be resolved in this way. Not only is the Vicomte Aramis dead, but his uncle is also quite cunning. The dead Duke's brother is a difficult man to deal with, for he is a greedy man with a taste for money. The Vicomte's daughter is said to be a beauty, and it's a shame that she will now be under the control of her uncle, who clearly wants to sell off everything that ever belonged to the Duke. For Edgar, it doesn't matter if she gets kicked out, she can move on with her life thanks to that man. Edgar also asks the man sitting across from him, and if they've waited too long. But at some point, Hazel does come to meet the men, And they're a little surprised that the girl has been here for a while and they didn't know it. Hazel asks while putting her hand on her heart that maybe she shouldn't explain who she is. Edgar says you don't have to introduce yourself in a situation like this. Because they know her. I think her name was Sazel. Edgar doesn't understand why she's here when she's the subject of their conversation. Edgar begins to ask where and how the dear lady came to be here. The man sitting next to him says that he sees that lady was able to leave the house with dignity in a beautiful dress. Sazel shows the guys her bag and tells them not to just sit there. The girl orders the guys to work faster. She expects the men to start putting money in the bag. Edgar is a little pissed off at the girl's behavior and clearly didn't expect such harshness from Sazel. Edgar tells her to listen to him. After all, she came to them out of the blue and it's confusing that the lady is being very rude. Sazel says who knows if the girl's being rude. But before that, Sazel says you won't sell the land. Isn't it odd that these guys are still in the village? But the men smile wryly and show there's a reason they're still in the village. They'll continue to use their powers either to bribe the uncle or to kill Sazel. There's no guarantee Sazel will be alive tomorrow if she doesn't sell the mansion. There are so many people are out to hurt her in any way they can. In that case, Hazel decides that the best solution is to sell the property. Hazel says she'd rather have the gold bars they showed her earlier instead of cash. She will sell everything, including the Viscount's residence and the surrounding area. Sazel holds out a deed to all the family lands scattered across Perron. The man named Edgar laughs nervously and looks at Sazel and says that it would be a good idea to sell the lands themselves. The men say that if Sazel has prepared it so suddenly, it will take about 50 bars of gold. But Hazel disagrees with the men's conclusions and says her final solution is to pay 200 gold scrolls. Edgar says that the lady knows nothing at all about the world, but 50 bars is enough and he offered Hazel a good price. A deal with a merchant. From a neighboring town, Sazel is a perfect match. The girl says she only needs 200 pieces. Edgar says that they can agree on 100 gold pieces, but Sazel keeps haggling and saying that she had said before that she would only settle for 200 bars. Sazel, with a bit of a sad face, realizing that the guys don't want to do business properly, says that if it was worth it, people like Edgar wouldn't even listen to her. Sazel says 200, and that's the final decision. Hazel asks for a carriage to go to the next customer, but Edgar jumps up from his seat and with a worried look asks Hazel to wait, because then the lady might have some problems. Hazel asks if she would have more trouble than Edgar, but the man can't understand what Hazel means. The lady tells the stupid guy that he booked this hotel and they've been sitting here for over a week. If they come back empty-handed, the lady thinks their customer won't leave it that way. Edgar looks at Sazel and listens to the girl. He can't believe that she is so smart and figured it all out on her own. As the girl leaves, Edgar once again jumps up from his seat and realizes that the matter may end badly, and Mr. Customer will not be happy to know that the estate has been sold to other buyers. Edgar decides that he must stop Sazel by any means necessary. He suggests that he accept the lady's demand, so let her sit down and they discuss it. Hazel opens her suitcase and smiles happily because it looks like the men have decided to agree to buy the mansion from her for 200 gold pieces. Next moment, the men fill the bag with 200 gold bars, and now the bag looks really heavy. Hazel is now rich and can do whatever she wants with that money, and her uncle didn't even get a penny from the sale of her father's mansion. Hazel decides she's got to get going. After all, she promised to vacate the house by tomorrow. Edgar says that if Hazel vacates the house by tomorrow, it will be much easier for them because the wagon will be waiting for its turn. But for some reason, the girl won't leave and stands by the door. Edgar doesn't understand why Sazel won't leave and looks at the boys with a sweet expression. Edgar assumes that Sazel has something to discuss, so he asks the girl what else she would like to find out. Edgar approaches Hazel and says he doesn't know why she's standing there like a rock. Maybe there's something wrong with her, but the deal is done, so nothing can be changed. Hazel is silent for a while and smiling sweetly says it's time for a new deal. Sazel shows the watch and with a snide smile says it's time to exchange the watch. The girl shows Edgar the watch and says it will be their new deal. Apparently, it's her father's watch that Sazel took from her uncle. and the missus is going to give it to her if the tough guys will do one simple job. Hazel even promises an extra reward after her little errand is done. The events develop in the morning in the mansion of Sazel's father. At the table sits the uncle and his wife. They do not realize that now there are some strange things happening to Sazel. The girl is acting out, and she's more energetic. They need to put the only heiress on guard. Uncle knows that the maid named Ellen definitely gave the sleeping pills to Hazel. But Uncle doesn't understand why he hasn't heard from her yet. Ellen was supposed to tell Uncle if Mistress had tea. Ellen will have to be scolded, for she keeps the gentleman waiting, which is unacceptable for a servant. The woman asks why her husband is so worried, because in any case, the property of the house will go to them. But the uncle is a little worried and says that yesterday there was that incident with the watch, after which he now doubts his own strength, because his brother's daughter has become somewhat brave. She smiled maniacally then and ordered him to keep his father's watch. It was the kind of wicked look that can only be seen in a penal colony of criminals. The girl was genuinely creeped out by what her uncle was doing. It clearly didn't like it. But the wife tries to calm her spouse and say that there is no reason to worry because even at the funeral, the girl was not herself. So it's likely that Sazel was very worried about her father's death, so she started acting strange, but she'll get used to it in time. The uncle agrees and says his wife is right. It's more likely Hazel is just not used to her father's death yet. This world is cruel to the young lady, and the uncle is not responsible for his niece. He just wants to get his money, and the girl will not resist after suffering grief from the loss of the only relative. It is necessary to hurry up because the people who decided to buy the mansion, too, will not wait forever. Uncle and his wife remember those people who offered a good sum of money to buy the mansion. Those people were serious. Today, Uncle will ask Ellen's maid to give Hazel some tea with a certain dash of sleeping pills again. According to the apothecary, if you drink just 1 cup of such tea, you can put the monster into a real deep sleep. The uncle says that in any case, Sazel will ask for help, and it will be time to lend her a hand. They're not going to support her, but they'll probably have to help their niece at least a little so that society won't be stirred up. But at a certain moment, a maid breaks into the Baron's house, who is very worried. The girl looks clearly worried about something and hurries to tell the news to the Baron. The Baron asks why Ellen has come only now and how long they will have to wait for her. Helene is very excited and tries to say something about the mistress who did something last night. The Baron snatches the document from Helene's hands and tells her to stop behaving like that. Because if Cecil is dead, the result will be the same, so let Ellen give back the letter she brought. Apparently, Cecil asked her uncle to take over. But when the uncle finally saw the letter, he was really surprised by what he read. He didn't expect something like this to happen. How dare that little brat get rid of her relatives like that? It's really disrespectful. His wife at this point immediately thought that Sazel was asking her uncle to take her place and asks if Sazel is finally handing over all the property to her uncle, and now she is calling for her uncle to dispose of everything himself. But the uncle reads the eviction order and doesn't understand what it could mean. Sazel has taken revenge on her uncle the way her uncle took revenge on her in her previous life. So she believes that such a decision was justified for the man who ruined her life and was responsible for Hazel's suffering. The maid says that there are guests outside and they should probably go out. Hazel is concerned and realizes that her relatives have come to see her very quickly. Hazel, dressed in her robe, happily opens the door and sees her relatives looking at her with an angry look. Hazel keeps smiling and says it looks like they all got her letter that she sent. The uncle begins to ask, what could this letter mean to Sazel? And for starters, the uncle demands a serious conversation. He also orders, have Hazel change into normal clothes, since there's a lot of relatives here. With some surprise and mockery, the mistress asks her uncle, does Sazel really need to change clothes in her own house? She can do whatever she wants in her house, and they are all relatives who came as guests, and they need to watch their language before interacting with mistress. Her relatives start making a fuss and try to get some sort of explanation from Sazel. After all, they have all received eviction orders. People are very much angry with Mistress Sazel, and her uncle was also very displeased. But Sazel parries all their non-accusations and says that the order says it all. It was a regular eviction order. Sazel raises his index finger and sweetly replies to all his relatives that if they can't read, they will first go to school where they will be taught the rules of reading. Hazel doesn't understand why all the relatives are making such a big deal out of something that wasn't even there. Sazel says that all these things that follow strict legal procedures, so the relatives need to get out by the date specified there. If they don't do it in time, they will find themselves in a very awkward position. So the relatives better to follow the instructions. Uncle doesn't understand how Hazel can say something like that. He yells at her and gets angry because Hazel's changed dramatically. And he can't understand how his niece pulled off this scam in one night. Uncle asks Hazel, "Is there not a shred of humanity in her?" He demands that Hazel, to reveal the secret behind her abrupt behavior. The man says that even though he is her uncle, he can demand his rights. But he has not done so, only because she's his favorite niece. Hazel wonders, what reason could there be for that? Could it be because she's his niece? Did they really want to take care of her all her life as her family? It's ridiculous. Sazel remembers her past life very well, and she knows for a fact that her uncle is a crook who would gladly steal every last dime from his niece, and he won't even think about her for the next few years. He'll just forget about his relative. The lady looks at the people around her with contempt. She's been through it all and knows it all. All these people have deceived her, and in truth, they were all to blame for Sazel's death. She knows full well that she wasn't held to be human, so let all those lousy relatives get the hell out. Sazel attacks with her arguments all the relatives who are gathered here. People seem to feel a real pressure from Sazel's words. Hazel starts sighing nervously and making her voice sound poorer and more miserable. The girl says that if her uncle continues to be up to something while poisoning her niece with sleeping pills while she is alone. Hazel says that she can ask Elin, who brings Hazel tea, if she knows that the tea contains sleeping pills. Ellen was a little disturbed by Hazel's words. The girl says it was unfair to do that to Hazel, but Ellen was just following orders. The maid accuses the uncle of mistreating her niece. The uncle tries to attack Hazel to stop telling the whole truth in front of the rest of the family. With fierce eyes and spittle spraying from his mouth, the uncle approaches Hazel and yells at her that the niece is crazy, because he's going to unfairly blame the uncle for the property. That blurred Hazel's eyes. Uncle says that all that property doesn't even belong to Hazel, and that she's out of her mind, so Uncle has to teach Hazel some manners. But at one point, when Uncle's got a firm grip on Hazel's hand and he's drooling and shouting accusations at Mrs. Hazel, big guys come up to him. It's Edgar and his friend who wanted to buy the estate. They warm up before giving Uncle a good punch in the face. Uncle is surprised that the guys came here so quickly because he hasn't had time to get in touch with the people who want to buy the estates yet. Edgar says that the mansion has been purchased. Edgar says that Hazel gave him an amazing watch last night. Edgar admits that he's shocked by the gift. Uncle hears it. All this and realizes that it was the very watch that Sazel asked him to take off his hand. Uncle doesn't understand what's going on here. He looks at the people around him and feels out of place. Hazel starts laughing openly at the uncle, who still doesn't get it. The girl says that for guys, the uncle is the one who gets the favor. She's the one who pays. The uncle next moment gets punched in the face by the big guys who happily beat him up. Hazel paid the man for the job with a bar of gold. Edgar says that the consequences are going to be pretty big anyway, and he asks Hazel what she is going to do. In addition, Edgar sniffs the gold to see if it is real or not. Edgar says that it looks like Hazel is going to be prosecuted because no one is going to let this case go. Hazel gives Edgar another bar of gold and says that she doesn't think about being chased, because it's unlikely. Sazel asks if she can find Edgar a few more people for her case. Edgar smiles sweetly and says it's a simple matter. Mistress is inwardly pleased to realize that money is all she needed. After all, it solves all the issues a girl could possibly have. Sazel realizes that it looks like the consequences of her uncle's revenge are over. Now, the girl can finally leave. First, the mistress needs to find a new place to live, and she is not going to trifle. Hazel wants to live well, because in her past life she was honest and poor, and now she is cunning and rich. Events take us to the city of Nuren, and it is the center of the north. It's a beautiful city that has modern architecture. It's early spring here, but the climate is strange enough that the trees are blooming even in the cold. Everyone is filled with pleasant smells. Visitors to the hotel ask the gentleman who runs the hotel, "Isn't there a single room left now?" The hotel manager says that there is one guest who has rented the whole hotel. The guys are looking at each other. They're very surprised. Is this guy so rich that he rented the whole hotel? Who could it be? But the events move on to a room with Hazel, who's enjoying a gourmet treat. Apparently, Hazel was the person who was spending so much money. The girl did not trifle and was not going to look for a mansion, so she rented a hotel. Her money is enough to live in this hotel for thousands of years. Hazel is happy that she rented such a large room, and now she has a lot of opportunities to be alone, and that no one interferes with her. If other people knew of her return, they'd say she must change the future for the better. But so say those who know nothing at all. Hazel's blood boils when she thinks of all the money she's collected that was returned to the National Treasury while she was incarcerated. In prison. After all, Hazel earned all that money the hard way. If you think about it, that's the first time Hazel ever spoke to that man. She remembers him. That's when the prisoner told her sister to listen to him carefully. Judging by the amount of her tears, she must have raised a lot of money. Hazel abruptly drops everything and realizes now is not the time. Even though Hazel got rid of Perron's land but can't afford to have fun and idle, so Hazel must work for the future. To avoid the failure of that life, Hazel must record the events before returning, in as much detail as possible. Mistress begins to write down what happened and to whom, what was the situation in the country, and so on. First, when she was betrayed and left home, it was 3 months after His Majesty the Emperor passed away. Then Hazel didn't repay a debt, or was it a marriage scam? Then the man promised that he would be sure to make Hazel happy when he returned from the army. He held Hazel's hand and asked her to wait for him faithfully so that the mistress could finally be happy. But when the man left, Hazel started getting receipts for the man spending her money, and he said he'd join the army and make Hazel happy. How gullible she was back then. Thank God that now Hazel finally has the wit and intelligence to at least a second life is not wasted, because then that scoundrel stole all her possessions and ran away. Hazel decides that if that scumbag ever catches her eye, she's going to wipe him off the face of the earth. After being tricked once, someone stabs her in the back. Before she can recover, another stab is thrown. I don't think it's written on Hazel's forehead that she's a simpleton, but she's still a good one. Hazel thinks that the memories of her suffering came up one after another, and the fact that the Empire had become more vicious after that incident with the Duke's death was one of the main facts of the fall. And then there was the sudden death of Duke Karzi, who had the most influence in the Empire. The ducal family of Erbios was the only family that could contain the imperial family. It had a long history and tradition. These guys were truly great. After the former emperor died, the Duke aided and abetted the new one, as well as having high power and could rule the entire empire. In fact, Duke Erbios stood behind the next emperor. This is truly the best family. However, Duke Erbios was honest and humble. In fact, even Father Sazel had never seen Duke Erbios's face before. Also, Father Sazel praised and worshipped him many times. Sazel thinks he was something of a role model. Even on Hazel's life, the death of Duke Erbios had a huge impact. Hazel learned of the Duke's death through flyers that were handed out on the street. It was the first event that brought Hazel's life to a standstill. The entire empire was shocked when the honorable and gracious Duke Erbios left this world. The news reached the common man. The people were filled with hope of how the empire would change if everyone united. Meanwhile, Sazel was once again deceived. After the Duke's death, the empire's society became extremely entrenched, but the people were left with one last hope. It was Duke Karzi Erbios who was the son of the previously deceased Duke. Karzi, blessed by the goddess Sartes, would benefit the empire. The faith of the people of the empire was no different from that of the people who had been under the bond of the goddess Sart for 100 years. However, this empire was in ruins. This event can be called the second phenomenon called destruction. Even the next Duke Kartzi hurriedly returned home after the death of his father, and he also died in a carriage accident. At the end of the ends, the Marquis of Ervante came to power. This is the late Duke's half-brother. When the greedy and despicable Marquis took over the country, the empire was lawless. Only power and money remained to rule and destroy the people. Real chaos was all over the empire, and people were trying to survive in every way they could think of. The mistress begins to count the number of times she has been deceived before this event. The girl counts the number of times. She'd been deceived, and that number is more than 12. Then Hazel was executed. So with the empire came the end of Hazel's life. Hazel gathers up all her handwritten notes and raises her head, screaming that this can't happen again. At some point, the girl hears a strange voice that greets the lady and asks how she is doing. It turns out to be an acquaintance of Edgar's who says there's been a ruckus downstairs about a man renting a whole penthouse. Edgar wonders who the rich man is. But Edgar doesn't understand why Sazel has such a serious expression on her face, if she's enjoying the wealth. Hazel approaches Edgar and says just one name, which gets Edgar incredibly excited. Hazel talks about the Arshel. She asks Edgar if the Duke is alive now. Edgar doesn't understand what this woman is saying. Edgar will sell his soul for money and fulfill the order to the best of his ability. But there is something Edgar cannot do. Edgar imagines in his head that the evil Hazel has decided to kill the Duke and asks Edgar to carry out such an order. Hazel realizes that if Edgar is so much afraid that the girl will ask to order the death of this Duke, then this Duke is fine and alive. Hazel asks Edgar how the Duke's son is doing with a sweet smile that doesn't portend trouble. Edgar tells Hazel not to even dream of the younger Duke because he will be even harder to kill. Edgar wonders why such a clever lady doesn't read the newspapers, for the Duke is to meet with envoys from the southern continent on behalf of His Majesty the Emperor. And the younger Duke of Kartza has been studying in the northern continent since he was young. He must be in the kingdom of Eritrea at a prestigious academy. Edgar doesn't know what Hazel's plans are or what the girl is up to, but Edgar warns the lady that her head will be off her shoulders before she even gets close to the young Duke. Hazel is glad because everything is different from her memories. Hazel smiles and happily asks what hidden agenda Edgar is talking about now, because the girl really means no harm and just wants to know the information. Edgar sees Hazel's behavior and decides that he should mind his own business, so he decides to get to the point he came here to make. Edgar holds out an envelope with a sheet for the lady. Edgar says it's one of the men Hazel was looking for, and he's not far from here. Hazel unfolds the envelope and greasily reads the contents. Edgar says that if Hazel pays him extra, he'll go and check it out himself. But Hazel reads the envelope and decides she'll do it herself. Hazel bets that if Edgar, the head of the villains, finds the child first, he'll recruit her. Asline is a criminal who will go down in St. Plesius history. Even before Sazel was imprisoned for wrongful convictions, the girl knew of Asline because of her reputation. In the newspaper articles that Hazel sold, Asline was always described as the devil's brains. Asline was a true devil who could do things that ordinary people couldn't even imagine in their wildest dreams. Sazel thought that these were exaggerated rumors, but after meeting Asline in person, she changed her mind. The newspaper articles were very cleaned up. It was a lot simpler than it actually was. Events take us to Asline, who is accused that the girl is a nasty rat and she can't stand in that place and make an innocent appearance. The evil woman says that Asline is a pretender who thinks that if she touches her things, she will go unpunished. But Asline says pathetically that it's not like that and that the mistress shouldn't blame her. Asline just wants to eat. Mistress. Asking. Is Asline in denial about her behavior? Does she really think? The woman doesn't know her kind. The woman assures Asline will only reform if she dies like her younger brother. She asks to take a look at this thief. Asline tries to justify her brother and says that he never stole because Jeremy just didn't get his paycheck. The woman wonders, what kind of paycheck are we talking about? She laughs snidely and asks Sazel why she should give a paycheck to scum like Asline. Aslan stands up and says pitifully that they had a legal agreement for the woman to pay the wages. The woman says it's ridiculous when Aslan talks about any law. She tells her that the boys have been her slaves since Aslan's stepfather sold her and his brother. And a slave doesn't dare speak arrogantly about the wages she earned from whence she learned it. The woman says if Aslan tries anything like that again, she'll die somewhere on the street of disease like her brother. The woman says she has to correct Aslan's bad habits, so she swings her arm and decides to beat the girl up. At one point, Hazel bursts into the tavern and holds the woman's hand. Hazel doesn't let any harm come to Aslan, who in a past life was a good friend of Hazel's. Hazel greets the people around her. The woman can't understand what such a lady forgot in this filthy place, but first she asks her to let go of her hand. The woman also says that there is no reason to get involved in a showdown with a slave. Hazel says that from her point of view, she should have intervened. Hazel approaches the girl, who looks warily at the mistress. Aslan doesn't know what to expect from Hazel, who has suddenly appeared and decided to protect her. The innocent eyes of the little girl do not portend any trouble, but Hazel knows that Aslan has a knife up her sleeve that she could use to kill the tavern worker. Mistress knows that the girl would probably kill the tavern keeper in cold blood and run away quickly. Hazel approaches the girl and decides to take the knife away so the girl doesn't hurt anyone. Hazel says that this is all normal and there is no reason for Aslan to say anything right now. Hazel smiles and realizes that Aslan has a real talent for being a criminal and one that the girl has been able to get with her hard life. Hazel reminisces about a past life when she met Aslan and she talked about her first murder. Then Aslan said that her first victim was a bar hostess in Niren, and it was the hostess who treated Aslan and her brother like slaves. Aslan said that her stepfather sold them, and she had worked in that bar since she was 5 years old. Then the mistress asked Aslan, "Did she kill that woman for revenge?" Aslan said she didn't. She was just faster. If Aslan hadn't dealt with that bitch, she would have killed her first. Hazel finishes remembering her conversation with Aslan in her past life. She is approached by a little girl who is still standing there looking at the lady with a confused look on her face. Aslan says that lady doesn't have to protect her. Aslan says that if the lady didn't help you, the people around her would have helped her. But Hazel realizes that these drunks must have already been bribed with money, because Aslan is a child who could have been brainwashed and taught to testify with stolen money. Hazel is amazed that the girl looks so much like Aslan from her past life. If the girl had killed the woman, none of the people would have said anything, because Aslan bribed them with money, which was the real skill of a killer and robber. The woman bar owner doesn't understand. "What's the lady doing in a place like this now?" she asks, "if Aslan is Hazel's hidden sister." But it can't be, because Aslan's stepfather dragged the girl by the hair and sold her, and the landlady thought Aslan would soon die after her little brother. But Aslan's life turned out to be surprisingly long. The woman says that in any case, the precious lady should go her own way and not interfere with mistress's business. The mistress asks, "Does the lady really want to buy something here before she leaves?" Hazel says only one word: "How much?" At which point, the mistress has the true gift of a merchant. The mistress interjects to Hazel, "Is the lady really going to buy something? Then it's a different matter altogether. The mistress's bar in this alley is the best, and the mistress would be happy to offer something to the lady." But Hazel tries to make it clear to the landlady that she's going to buy the girl what Hazel is now saying about this baby. Hazel pulls Aslan to him and says he wants to buy this girl for himself. It's a worthless girl, and the mistress doesn't understand where such a nice lady would want to use such a filthy ragamuffin. But the next moment, the mistress realizes that at first sight, Hazel seems to be a lady who does charity work, so the mistress can make a good profit on the sale of this girl. The landlady begins to reveal her merchant skills and says that if you think about it, this child is very industrious. The cost of her purchase expenses while she was growing is all counting can add up to 1,000 to finally pay off the mistress offers to buy her child for 1,000. The mistress herself is shocked by the amount offered. She didn't expect to be able to dare to ask 1,000 for such a vile ragamuffin. Aslan tells mistress not to spend too much money on her. The mistress sees that Aslan is determined to interfere. So she reaches out her hand and slaps the girl on the shoulder with her own hand. At that moment, Mistress Sazel gives her a look that says that if the mistress pulls another stunt like that, Lady won't let it go. Apparently, Sazel will not allow to offend the girl, who for some reason is very important to Mistress. Asleen herself has never seen the lady before and can't understand what kind of trouble she is in again. Sazel shows the mistress the money. The mistress is overjoyed to see such a great bundle of money. She can't believe it's even possible. The mistress says that the lady will not suffer any damage and she can offer Hazel everything she needs in return for the girl. Hazel asks that the hostess light the candle as well. When the hostess brings the candle to Hazel, Lady stares intently at the candle flame. The hostess continues to praise the child and say that she looks rather ugly now. But if the girl is washed, she will be a real beauty. Sazel begins to look closely at the bottles of alcohol that were on the table. Grandpa gets an idea. At this moment, the hostess of the bar hugs her money and says that the pimp on the street has marked the future of this girl. After all, she is beautiful and will be able to perform special favors as required. Sazel warns the hostess to shut her mouth, for there is alcohol spitting now. The landlady didn't listen to Sazel and kept talking about the girl. Hazel, with a face full of disgust, poured the entire bottle on the hostess. In the next moment, the woman was incredibly angry that the lady had allowed herself to do such a thing. Demonic emanations began to appear on her face and began to materialize. The woman had never been so angry before. She wondered what else was going on, because if Hazel had given the money, she could have gone slowly. But Hazel holds a candle to the alcohol-addled hostess's face. Hazel says she gave the money, which includes the cost of the alcohol and the laundry. Sazel says that if the hostess makes one more move, Sazel will burn her to the ground. In the next moment, Hazel turns to Asleen to assess how the girl looks now. Sazel notices that Asleen looks like she is ready to kill right now. Mistress takes Asleen's hand and suggests that the girl go together. Sazel promises that everything will be fine and she will take care of Asleen. Hazel visits the luxurious restaurants in the village, and there are so many delicious and appetizing dishes on the table. Sazel suggests that Asleen eat quickly to gain strength and health. Asleen says that Sazel didn't have to do all this just because of sympathy for Asleen, but Sazel says that there can be no sympathy and that Asleen needs her mistress. And to top it all off, Hazel doesn't need Asleen as a slave. She needs her as a companion. Asleen is surprised to see a drop of cowl on her face, for the girl is truly disturbed. She has never had a situation like this in her life. Asleen says there is no way she can be the companion of such a noble lady. But Sazel tries to convince Asleen that it's possible, and Asleen doesn't have to stutter. To top it all off, Sazel is aware of the girl's pretense. Asleen says that if she can't stutter, she won't. But the girl still doesn't know what Mistress is up to. But if she is going to play with the girl, then Asleen will run away and will not tolerate such treatment. Sazel says that if Asleen thought that way, she would have used the knife she had stashed away by now, wouldn't she? Hazel looks at the girl sitting in front of her. At this point, Hazel has become truly experienced, and yet Hazel remembers that in her past life, Asleen called her a common simpleton. Then in prison, she is told that there is a smell in the air of someone who has been constantly deceived. Sazel smiles and tells Asleen that she doesn't need to worry because Sazel won't make the girl do slave labor, and it's not charity at all. Asleen asks what she will do then, as things get stranger and stranger. Why a lady like Sazel would want a vile girl like Asleen? Sazel wonders why she is different from Asleen. Sazel is also an orphan, and Asleen is an orphan, and people are basically all equal. Asleen asks, "Are they? All people are equal, before the law." But Sazel says with a smile that all men are equal before money. Sazel begins to explain to the surprised girl that in Asleen's world, there's no one you can trust and rely on. So the best thing would be to have someone to turn to. The way to live in peace is to start a family. Sazel says that starting a family is not difficult or unbelievable. There will be no cheating, and there will be trust in the team. At one point, Hazel grabs the girl's hand, and in Asleen's hand, she finds a gemstone that belonged to Hazel. Mistress says family is when you turn a blind eye to petty theft. Sazel says family is when you don't call the police when there's a domestic dispute, and you don't start beating up a family member. Sazel asks the stunned girl if she has understood all of Mistress's instructions. If Asleen has finished, then the girl can go now. Asleen asks Mistress to wait. Sazel says she will not force Asleen, and Asleen is not the type to be forced. Asleen doesn't understand. Vedi Sazel doesn't know her well. Hazel turns to the girl following her and says, "What? Does she really think Hazel doesn't know Asleen?" Hazel doesn't do anything that causes damage, so Asleen doesn't have to worry. All Hazel needs is Asleen's abilities. At one point, a carriage rushes by Mrs. Sazel and Sazel's heel breaks. The girl starts to fall backwards. And at that moment, Asleen throws her knife, which the girl was holding in her sleeve. The girl aims it to hit the clothes on Mistress Sazel's shoulder. Mistress Sazel says that Asleen understood her correctly because that's what the lady was talking about. Sazel looks at Asleen, who at that moment begins to smile, and says she'll go with Mistress. But before she does, Asleen wonders how much Mistress is willing to pay the girl for her services. When the girls were in prison, it was like they had a wish or a dream to meet in another world, because they are a real family. A while later, Asleen, covered in breadcrumbs, starts complaining to Hazel. Does her sister really want Asleen to gain weight and then sell her? Is Hazel thinking of selling Asleen to that pimp from Nurza Street the bar owner was talking about? But Sazel orders that Asleen does not say such terrible things, because further and Sazel really explodes, because from the mouth of the girl comes out a huge number of terrible words. Sazel realizes that it was impossible to reveal Asleen's soul in one day, even though the girl was smart. Hazel realizes that the girl is extremely wary, as she lives a hard life. But for starters, Hazel decides she's attracted to Asleen by the money. Hazel begins to pet her new sister and realizes that raising a wildcat is very difficult. Asleen doesn't know what Sazel is up to, but let the mistress not think about getting something for free from Asleen. A contract is a contract. Hazel keeps stroking the girl and says she understands because didn't Hazel say she wouldn't honor the contract? If Asleen's finished eating, we can go back. Asleen gets up from the table and sticks a fork in her hands. All this action is noticed by Hazel, who will not allow the girl to misbehave so badly. Hazel stops Asleen and with a hard stare demands that the girl leave the fork where it is. Asleen realizes she can leave it there. But Sazel takes Asleen's other hand and tells the girl to pull out the knife as well. Asleen is a very bloodthirsty child who will not stop at the usual childish antics, but will go further. With this girl, you have to be careful and keep your hand on the pulse. When the girls walked down the street, Asleen began to ask her new sister what she does in life. After all, if Sazel is not trying to use Asleen as a pickpocket or bait, why then the mistress needs a girl thief? Asleen finds it hard to believe the talk of a happy family and reminds her that Sazel said she doesn't do charity work. Asleen says she needs to know her purpose, and until Hazel tells her, Asleen won't know what to prepare for or what to expect. Hazel says that this is great news and it's time to tell Asleen her purpose. Sazel's real goal is to deceive the entire empire. Asleen is in for a real shock after hearing these words. Little girl. She didn't expect such a grand plan. Sazel says she's going to take over this country. Sazel is going to cheat until she is caught and slowly devour the empire to the bone, so Asleen will stop doing the little things. After all, can the red thread of such a child be cut short over such small things at a time when the girl could have grown into so much more? Asleen starts laughing out loud and apologizes to her sister for being so disrespectful of her plan. But Asleen thinks that Hazel is really naive, because Hazel has read some third-rate novel and now believes that such plans are possible. But Hazel does not react to Asleen's words and looks at the girl with a serious face while smiling. Asleen sees the look on Sazel's face and realizes that apparently the mistress is not joking. Sazel says that she is and that they will not be doing this plan just the two of them. Asleen asks who else will be affected in this grand plan. Sazel says that if Asleen has had her laugh, then we can go now. After all, it's time to find the rest of their family. Asleen really doesn't know what Sazel is talking about. Is the next step that they need to find people first, for this absurd plan. At this point, a boy is handing out flyers. The boy shouts that it's an emergency because Duke Urbios has passed away. Sazel didn't expect this news so soon, in her plan. Mistress was completely stunned by the news. Sazel sets off in the carriage with Asleen. Asleen asks what that rumbling noise is. Apparently, she has already said she will be taking Sazel as an assistant. But Sazel doesn't hear Asleen. The woman is immersed in her plans and realizes she's been too irresponsible. Hearing that the Duke is faring well in the capital, Hazel is relieved and thinks her fortunes have changed. It wasn't just the past. It was the beginning that had made her life a living hell. So Hazel had to be more vigilant. The Duke's death is not a good sign from the beginning of her plan. So Hazel decides to rush to the scene. The Aslins start to take offense that Sazel's ignoring her and say why they should be in a hurry in the first place. Coachman so complains. If they rush any faster, the horses will fall off altogether. Sazel says she can do it, but Asleen pulls out her knife and smiles. The girl seems to think that having something like that touch her neck gives her strength for something she's never done. Hazel says that killing is not allowed and that Asleen doesn't need to make this kind of thing a problem. The girl agrees, albeit reluctantly. It is clear that she has special principles that she inherits. Asleen asks, if the charioteer loses one man, will the cart go faster? The charioteer doesn't realize what this little girl is doing. Does she think she's going to throw him off the wagon? In the next moment, we are brought to Mr. Kartsa. The knight asks the Lord to at least to close his eyes for a moment. But Kartsa looks at his interlocutor and asks what the captain of the guard said. After meeting His Majesty's messengers on their way to the opening ceremony of the library in the slums, the carriage overturned. The construction work caused it to roll down a cliff. Kartsi asks if his father's body is still intact. The man sitting across from him doesn't dare look at the gentleman, so he looks at the floor. He is silent. He doesn't answer the gentleman's question and offers Kartsi tea to calm down. Kartsi demands that they stop the carriage at once, but the man asks the gentleman to be more calm and wait for them to arrive. Kartsi wrinkles his forehead and says he will personally drive the horse to the place and find his father's body. Kartsi demands to know the exact circumstances of the accident before the funeral, because the first duty of the head of the family is to leave no doubts in his path. However, the Lord hasn't eaten much, so his companion asks him to be a little more careful with his health. The knight sitting next to Kartsa hands the Lord a flask with some kind of drink. Kartsi drinks it all down and asks if it will now be enough to stop the knight from asking any more stupid questions. Kartsi demands that a horse be prepared and a letter sent immediately. Let the place be well guarded. At some point, Karzi hears a knight behind him swinging to strike. Karze has no time to react, and the next moment, the knight plunges his dagger into his lord's body. The knight looms over Karsi and says that he ordered Karsi to take his time, and if the Lord is so interested in how his father will die, you could ask the knight. Kartsi realizes that this is how his father died. The Lord didn't expect such a stab in the back from the closest people in the family. As night falls, events take us to the girls who have thrown off the driver to speed up the carriage. Asleen asks her sister, did she tell Asleen about this place? Asleen doesn't understand where Sazel is going because it's already a crossroads. Hazel begins to remember her past life, what was written on the newspapers she read. She remembers what the good newspaper was saying. Apparently, the Duke wasn't acting like his usual self. He was in too much of a hurry to hear the sad news about his father because he was too young. It would have been better if he had gone through a birch forest, but he turned into an oak forest, and it was impossible to find the body either. Sazel remembers that it was an oak forest, so he orders Asleen to immediately drive towards the oak forest. The girl doesn't understand. Why go to the oak forest where Kartsi might be there? Sazel says that Asleen should take a closer look because there is a huge amount of red fruit. The girls look closely, and just down the road they start to see something. She hopes that nothing has happened yet. If the line of the Duchy of Urbios disappears in the weak empire, then all justice in this country will disappear. In the past, the world has become so corrupted that it has reached the level of turmoil. Now that Hazel has decided to become the Empire's greatest rogue, it will all be useless if the Empire collapses before then. Hazel asks a worried Asleen if they can go at even faster speed. Asleen doesn't understand. Is she really going slow on purpose? Most likely Hazel is just laughing at the girl. But the next moment, Hazel orders Asleen to stop because she sees the carriage. Asleen doesn't realize what's going on, and before she knows it, Asleen jumps off the carriage and runs to the broken carriage next to it. Hazel yells that there is no time for discussion, we need to act. Hazel finds the fallen medallion. The girl sees blood on it and realizes that it looks like people have had an accident. But it's very hard to determine the final cause. If it's something like this, there are probably no survivors. Asleen tells Hazel to go. After all, this is a very evil place, and Asleen thinks it's best not to be in this place. Asleen says it looks like they're too late anyway. If they do something wrong, they could be arrested for attempting to kill people who were dead here. But Hazel doesn't listen to Asleen and goes into some bushes. Asleen's trying to get her sister to listen to her younger sister. After all, if someone comes in now, the girls will be grabbed right away. Hazel says she has enough money to buy a lawyer and the entire Supreme Court. At least now a lawyer can be bought. If we leave it like this, it will be harder. Asleen doesn't understand why they can't just leave it alone, but her older sister explains that the Empire will collapse and then the point of their money will cease to exist. In the next moment, Hazel finally finds the body of the heir to the great family Urbios lying among the grass of flowers and shrubs. Hazel takes a seat beside Kartzi, and for they have finally met. This man is the guardian of her empire. Asleen thought her sister was the most naive fool in the world. Didn't realize Hazel had such a clear purpose. That's a real man's face. Hazel listens to Asleen rebuke her, an immature noblewoman who left home to rebel against the world. Hazel says she knows Asleen still thinks that. Hazel realizes she did the right thing in saving Kartzi for future generations. But the girl doesn't understand how a man can look like that. It's a handsome and wounded man. The girl's heart begins to beat harder at the thought of it, because it echoes in her chest. It's a sad and pitiful feeling. The heroine realizes she can't feel that way. At some points, girls get really scared, because she felt a similar feeling when she was on the verge of death in a previous life. Asleen approaches Kartz and deduces that the man is barely breathing. Is there any chance he could survive? Kartzi could die at any minute. Hazel screams that the opportunity to save Kartz should not be missed, because then everything was for nothing. The girls begin to carry the almost alive man in their arms. Asleen doesn't understand why they have to carry the man to some strange place, because there is a hospital for wounded people where they could get help immediately. That night, the girls load the man into the carriage and run away. The only place they could get to is in the middle of the countryside. However, the scenery is great, and so Kartzi can be buried in this village in the morning. Hazel doesn't understand what her youngest is saying right now. Who's Asleen going to bury here? At some point, a village man comes out to the girls and asks, "What's the carriage doing here?" Asleen glares and wonders if the man is the boss. The man asks what the girls are doing here, but Asleen doesn't let the man even think about it. She jumps on the man and says that she and her mistress were looking for a place to stay while traveling, and they liked this place a lot, so they ask the owner so the girls can stay here for a couple days. The landlord says it's just an empty house, and he lives in a lower village. A man rarely comes to this place, so it must be quiet. No one comes and goes. Asleen realizes it's a real stroke of luck to find a place like this. The girls overjoyed. Asleen asks, "Are they really not going to make any trouble?" But their mistress is not such a stingy person, so she will be able to pay an equal fee. At some point, Hazel comes out and pretends to be very ill. Hazel says that she is apologizing to her master because she was so very tired from the long ride that she couldn't get out of the wagon and say hello. Asleen starts crying and tells her to come inside quickly, because what will happen if she gets sick now? Her mother has passed away and Hazel is in great shock, but they still have to take care of themselves in such a difficult moment. Hazel says that Asleen says all the right things, and if anything happens to Hazel, their dad will be very unhappy. Asleen doesn't understand why Hazel would say such a thing, because it's a real horror. The man hears the girls talking and is really surprised. He asks for the women to stay in his house. With an incredibly sweet face, Mistress asks the master if they can stay in the house. And the man says, of course, because it's the right place for such a noble lady. But the village he lives in has become very noisy. There seems to have been an accident nearby, and a lot of military and government officials came looking for the body of some important gentleman. Hazel and Asleen look as surprised as possible. The girls ask, could there have been some kind of accident? They're really surprised and shocked. The man says that in any case, the girls should be careful. To top it all off, he says that if the guests are not inconvenienced, he will bring them food every morning. Sazel says it's been a long time since Mom died. The food's not coming down. So Sazel says that Mommy won't have long to wait and her daughter will come to her soon. Asleen cries even more and says that she will go with Mistress to her mother. The man obviously did not expect to hear such things from these women. The master is upset and walks away. The girls stay behind and start laughing. They have pulled off this scam very skillfully. But the next moment, Sazel realizes that they have to get serious and move the man. The guys carry Kartzi into the house to a clean bed. The girls' backs and muscles all over their bodies start to ache from being so heavy. The girls decide that they should bring a doctor to examine Kartzi's body. The boy is obviously very badly hurt. If they try to bring Kartzi to a doctor, it could be very difficult. Sazel says that if they're going to save him, then they have to finish the job. Asleen asks skeptically how Sazel is going to find a healer out here in the middle of nowhere. Asleen incredulously says that somewhere in her dream, Sazel saw that a man can be snatched from the clutches of death. So, don't let the ladies make up their own legends. In his condition, even if they save him, he'll barely be able to move. If there really is someone who can save him, it's not in the village. Stab and pierce the god of death, and even cut off his head, the one who can save him. Sazel orders Asleen to go and find this man. In the meantime, Sazel will monitor the patient's condition. With a little disbelief, Asleen asks, is Sazel really only going to monitor Kartzi's condition? Asleen clearly realizes that Sazel likes Kartzi. Asleen is accused of wanting to get rid of the girl so she can be alone with Kartzi and make all sorts of inconveniences. Sazel angrily says she will do no such thing and let her sister go in search of a healer. Sazel realizes that at his age, Sazel is a very bright child. Sazel also realizes that if the girl was really scared, she'd slit her partner's throat. Hazel's thinking how to turn Asleen into a real person. And this time, Sazel doesn't know where Asleen hid her knife, because Asleen always thinks about her safety. Hazel knows Dr. Ray's first name, but no last name. The address is the biggest and best in the north in Hefner. It's a huge nursery. Asleen doesn't understand if she's gonna look for a vet. Sazel has to squeeze her ears with her hands because of Asleen's screaming, so she doesn't traumatize them. Asleen says that at the very least, Hazel should explain what kind of person this is. Sazel says that when Asleen sees him, she will immediately think of an angel. Asleen wonders, is this really the angel that lives in the nursery? Sazel says the girl will know when she sees it. If she gives her the address, the angel will confirm the speculation. Asleen says that if you go to that address and there is not the right person there, then despite their contract, Asleen, she's not going to let this go.